Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Hey, welcome to California Haunts Radio tonight. It is great to be here. Started out another week, inching ever closer to Thanksgiving. Wow, wow, we. I hope some of you guys were able to attend yesterday's reading from Dickens' Christmas Carol. I had some issues reading it on Google Books. However, I've gotten one for Amazon, so next Sunday we're going to continue with our weekly read leading up until Christmas, and we're in chapter 2 right now. We're going to be starting chapter 2, so this will be an easier read for me because it's not on like orange yellow background. Okay, so and plus, I didn't know this with Google Books that you couldn't enlarge the text, because I'm like everybody else, I'm a blind bat. So at least now I've got it on my Kindle, so I can do it that way. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming. We got a great guest tonight. My name is Charlotte. I will be your host for the next hour or so. I also own the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team at www.californiahaunts.org. And the website for this radio show is www.californiahauntsradio.com. My team is 35 strong up and down the state of California. We have additional members in Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Hawaii doing some work for us. We're all nonprofits, so if you have any paranormal issues, that includes, extraterrestrial or anything like that, we're more than willing to come in and take a look at it. We don't charge, because we're out to help people. My guest tonight, it's going to be fun because it's like every time you hear about this place, SETI, every time you hear about it, it's always with photos or video of all the telescopes, and you see them and they're all in a row there, and it's just really cool. And getting this, having Dr. Shostak come on to talk to us, he's the lead astronomer at SETI. Having him come on to talk to us about stuff is just fantastic, and I'm really excited about it. So, without further ado, hello, sir.
How are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
The signal hasn't been interrupted by ghostly actions.
Or extraterrestrials doing stuff, right?
Yeah, could be.
So tell me about yourself, sir.
Well, I mean, what's there to say? I am indeed an astronomer. Radio astronomy is my background. And I work at the SETI Institute, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and have done for a while now. I've been there longer than any other job I've ever held. So, yeah, that's it.
What do you do as an astronomer? What do you do in relation to SETI?
Well, I'm mostly involved with it. I mean, I do a lot of different stuff, but
sure.
Mostly writing, to be honest. I do a lot of writing. But look, the SETI program is basically, or has been typically, listening for signals using big antennas to try and eavesdrop on the radio signals from aliens. That's the, if you will, the oldest experiment at the SETI Institute. In fact, when I joined for the next 10 years, it was basically the only experiment at the Institute. Now we have many more scientists who are working on questions of astrobiology. Could there be life on Mars, or Jupiter's moon Europa, or Ganymede, or Callisto, or Enceladus around Saturn, or Titan also around Saturn, or for that matter, even on Pluto? These are all places where you might have some life. It'd all be microscopic, but at least it would be biology.
That's very interesting. And where the sound is concerned, have you guys picked up anything of interest as far as the radio, as far as that part goes?
Well, if we had, I think you wouldn't have to ask that question because it would it would be a really big story. So no, we have not yet.
Is it true that space makes its own noise?
Well, yeah, it is true. I mean, not space per se,
right?
But the gas in space, the gas that sort of hangs between the stars, certainly makes noise. If it's heated up, it makes noise too, different in a different mechanism, but still making radio noise. But also a lot of objects in the sky make radio noise. I mean, the sun does, and Jupiter does, and Saturn, and you've got quasars and pulsars, and all sorts of objects out there that are producing radio noise. Just like there are a lot of objects out there that produce light. Well, some of them produce light, others reflect light. Right? The sun produces a lot of light. An idea that you can verify tomorrow when you step outside to pick up your morning paper.
So what's a scientist like you doing in a place like SETI, looking for extraterrestrials?
Well, listen, my background, as I may have mentioned, was radio astronomy. So
right.
That's basically the same technology that we used to try and find ET. So that wasn't much of a change. And it turned out that I got a phone call from the SETI Institute at a moment in my life when if they had called, I'd take the job. They called and I took the job.
Well, it's obvious you love your job. What do you love the most about it?
Well, I think it's just the fact that there are always new ideas. There's always new information. When I joined the SETI Institute, I mean, we didn't even know if other stars had planets. Well, today we know about a lot of planets. I mean, that's new info. That's exciting info. That's something that gets you excited. Also, the development of technology, computers today are so much faster than they were, say, a couple of decades ago, that you can do more interesting experiments. And there are also all sorts of mysteries that come up in astronomy all the time. What is what is dark energy? What is dark matter, right? What are fast radio bursts? There are all sorts of things you find and you don't understand, not at first. Usually takes a couple of years. Then somebody figures out what's going on.
What makes you think that there could be life out there?
Well, if it's not, then there's something very special about the Earth, right? I mean, if you figure Earth is the only place that has life and none of these other places do, then Earth must in some way be exceptional, because we now know that there are like 1 trillion planets in our own galaxy, and there are roughly 200 billion other galaxies, each with 1 trillion planets. Now, those numbers are very big. And if in all of that, only Earth is interesting, that's like saying I'm the only person on the Earth with toes, right? I mean, I've not seen the toes of people in South America. I assume they have them, but maybe not. Maybe I'm really special. But that would be so unusual as not to be very credible. So basically, we believe they must be out there. Otherwise, we have to find something really special about our planet, and nobody really ever has.
Do you guys look at the supposed encounters that people have, or do you kind of dismiss those?
Well, I do, only because I don't really look at them in the sense that I go and talk to them in person. But I am contacted almost daily by people who have had encounters or seen something and so forth. And I respond to them all. I mean, I usually ask if you have any photos or videos, send those to me, and I'll give you my opinion. And they often do send them, not always. Sometimes they think, no, I'm not going to send this to you. But if they do, I have a background in photography too. So I often can figure out what it is they're seeing. Sometimes not, but usually I can.
Well, that was my next question, was that, when somebody sees something up in the sky, because you've got all kinds of satellites up there, especially that one that has all the, that looks like the linked chain that's flying around up there. Some people mistake those a lot of the time for UFOs. So are you able to explain to people, hey, this is what this is? Or when you're looking up, is there a certain flight path that like satellites take that maybe something else wouldn't?
Well, almost all the satellites you see from the ground with your eyes are in low Earth orbit. So that means they're only a couple of 100 miles up. They're not very far away from you. And if they happen to be passing overhead, just after sunset or just before sunrise, because they're much higher, from their point of view, the sun hasn't set yet, so they can reflect light from the sun. These have a lot of shiny surfaces, and very often they'll just sort of, light up for you. And if it's a satellite that's in low Earth orbit, it would cross the entire sky from any particular position in about, maybe 10 minutes or thereabouts. So if you see something moving across the sky and it takes more or less 10 minutes to go from one side to the other, you can say, well, it's probably a satellite. Mostly what people send me are not actually photos of satellites. They're mostly photos of aircraft or Venus or, something like that.
I remember when Skylab fell out of the sky. And I remember I live in Sacramento, so I remember getting up at 3 in the morning, and you could actually see it. In some spots as it was coming down through the atmosphere, you could see it on fire. And I remember seeing it shoot across the sky. It looked like a meteor on fire.
Yeah.
When it came down.
Yeah, I think it landed in Australia, to the benefit of the Australians who happen to be in the surplus space hardware business. Yes. Although there probably wasn't much to recover.
So what are you doing for SETI now? I understand, I understand your job, but are you looking for any particular planets or anything like that?
Well, we we used to, whenever astronomers would publish a paper in which they say, well, we found, another two planets around these stars or whatever, then we would turn our antennas in that direction. But we don't do that anymore. And the reason is enough planets have been found around other stars. The numbers,
Hmm.
like 4,500 or something like that. That's a lot. That you can do statistics and you can say, well, it turns out that 80, 90, or close to 100% of all stars have planets. So there's no point in just chasing after the latest planets. You just aim at the nearest stars
Okay.
because you're almost guaranteed that the majority of them have planets.
Now, I guess a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, there was something else discovered in our solar system, if I remember right.
I'm not so sure about our solar system. I'm not sure what you refer to there.
Okay.
There was a radio source that was kind of in the news a couple of weeks ago that was coming from near the center of our galaxy, or maybe even the other side of our galaxy, elsewhere in our galaxy. And the question was, what was it?
Sure.
And we don't know, but most likely it's a new kind of cosmic object that makes radio noise. There's no reason to think it's artificial.
Right, right. So, for the people that don't know this, what is the difference between a planet and, say, an asteroid?
Well, to begin with, the planet's bigger. They're made
Okay.
pretty much of the same stuff, actually, particularly planets that are, in the outer solar system, like Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus, Neptune,
Hmm.
Pluto. A lot of water ice because there was a lot of ice out there when they were formed. And asteroids also have a fair amount of ice, and they're rocks. But asteroids are of a size that you could fit them, in a Texas ranch easily, most of them anyhow. So, they're small objects.
Now, are moons determined to be moons because they're in the orbit of a large planet? Is that how you guys distinguish it?
Distinguished moons?
Moons from the planets, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how do you know that, they're like, what, 60 or 70 moons of Jupiter. Now, how do we know they're moons? It isn't because they have little brass plates on the side that says property Jupiter. I mean, it's because they orbit Jupiter and
Right.
they're smaller than Jupiter. Now, kind of an exception to this sort of obvious way to define them is with Pluto. Pluto has, four or so moons too, but one of them, the bigger one, is almost as big as Pluto. So is the moon a moon of Pluto, or is Pluto a moon of this other object? And it almost becomes a semantic question. Maybe the thing to do is to call Pluto a double planet because
Sure.
this moon Charon is almost as big as Pluto itself.
What's one of the most exciting things that has come up since you've been with SETI?
Well, I mean, there are always interesting things, I have to say.
Right.
Excitement, yeah. I mean, we had a false alarm back in the 1990s where we thought maybe we'd found a signal, and that was certainly exciting. But the excitement ended about a day after it began because we were able to track down where the signal was coming from, and it
Hmm.
wasn't ET. But that was interesting because that doesn't happen very often. You don't get a signal that you can't determine right away whether it's ET or just terrestrial interference. So that made for excitement. There are always exciting things going on, mostly involving the other people who work for the organization, of course. But that would be true in any job.
Right, right, right. Could it be, this whole thing with the ETs? I was just thinking, could it be because maybe the frequencies you guys are looking for, they're on other frequencies?
Well, we try and cover as much of the radio spectrum as possible. I mean, the number of possible frequencies it's finite, so you
Right.
can look at most of them, and we try and look at the ones that are in the part of the radio spectrum where the universe is pretty quiet. I mean, if
Hmm.
the aliens are broadcasting anything, they're going to do it at a frequency where they're not drowned out, if you will, by cosmic static, natural cosmic static. So that's where we look. And we cover not all of the frequencies, that's for sure, and
Hmm.
maybe we're missing the right one, but we cover a lot of them. And there've been many SETI experiments looking at many different frequencies. So
So when you are doing your research, how does that work? Is there a printout that comes out? Like with the like with the different frequencies on there. So then you guys are looking for spikes, or how's that work?
well, that's the way it works in the movies. But typically these days we monitor something like 70 million different channels. That would be a lot of computer paper to print out.
Hmm.
So it's not printed out at all. It's just You just have software that's looking at what you're doing all the time and is deciding, is this interesting or is it not interesting? And the software now is pretty good after, something like 30 years of development. Now, it's pretty good at saying, okay, this is just another telecommunications satellite or whatever it is. So, usually it's doing all the boring stuff, and the computers usually don't bother you with the boring stuff.
I remember when you talk about the computers, and how far they've come. My mother used to work for AT&T, and I remember taking tours there when I was like 10 or 11, and I remember the computer rooms, the stuff to just run the massive computers, and it was like a house, like a 3-bedroom house size, where they had all the brains for the computers. And it's not like that anymore. It's fascinating now when you look at the difference in the technology.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, my cell phone has more compute power than the the university I used to work for a long time ago. I mean, that's just the case. But that's due to the developments here in the Silicon Valley, because every 2 years they double the amount of compute power you can get into any particular size. So it's yes, it's exactly what you say. It's truly astounding.
Well, look at the space shuttle too. Towards the end of the program, a lot of the home computers had more power than what was on the space shuttle.
Oh yeah. Well, anything you put into space is probably 5 or maybe even 10 years out of date, because there's this long cycle of designing it, building it, launching it, and so forth. So anything we have in space is old technology.
What do you say to people that kind of want to get into astronomy and just don't quite know how to do it or what to do?
Well, it's not hard to know what to do. I mean, nobody told me what to do. You just go to school and you study the subject, right? Most importantly, in graduate school, undergraduate school, you should take general courses. If you're interested in astronomy, then you ought to take courses in, physics and certain mathematics and stuff like that. But or if you're interested in planetary astronomy, then you might take chemistry or biology.
Sure.
All those are things you should probably take. But in grad school, you actually get to do a research project, and that's where you specialize a little bit.
I used to think it was funny because when I started school, my mother still had like these encyclopedias from the 30s and 40s.
Yeah,
and I used to read. I was really, I've had telescopes. I've got a 12-inch Meade equatorial that I used as a camera on there and everything. And I've been fascinated since I was a kid. And I remember reading these books, and it was just funny because, man will go to the moon someday, blah, 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 or you get the stuff where the theories are out there, like if you put Saturn in your swimming pool, it's going to float, that kind of stuff.
Well,
so it's interesting.
Offend the neighbors, yes.
Yes. But it'd be a hell of a view, wouldn't it?
Well, probably not. They would more than swallow the earth.
Be kind of fun to walk the rings. Too bad they're gaseous, huh? You just walk around on that sucker.
Yeah, well, in a way, we've done that. We've had spacecraft that went through the rings. So.
Yes. Yeah. How exciting is it for you guys when, like you say, a spacecraft like that flies through the rings, or like the Mars Explorer lands?
Well, I mean, I think we're as excited as the next guy, probably more so. And some of the people that work at the Institute, I mean, the ones that study the rings of Saturn, for example, might be even more excited. In fact, they might be involved. They might have experiments on some of these things. I mean, that's certainly true for some of the orbiters and landers that go to Mars, right? We send a lot of hardware to Mars. And these days, most of it actually gets there and is still working when it lands. But that didn't used to be the case. That's true now. And, the people there are interested in, could there be life on Mars? Maybe not today, but was there ever life? And how would you find it? And how would you find it if it's not life as we know it, but somehow different from life as we know it? Those sorts of things. I mean, of course you're going to get excited about that. That's your job. You wouldn't have that job if you didn't find it interesting.
Well, I agree with you when you say, we can't be the only planet that has life. With all the millions of planets out there, should I use billions like Carl Sagan, right? Billions upon billions of planets out there, and and things out there. There's got to be something else that supports life.
Well, one would think so. Otherwise, they're just, you have to keep looking for something very special about Earth. And there are people who think Earth is special, but there are not a lot of them. And the other thing to note is that, the oldest life that we've found on Earth goes back about 3.5, 3.6 billion years. Now, the Earth is only about 4.6 billion years old. And, there was already quite a bit of life 3.6 billion years ago. I mean,
Hmm.
microscopic, but there was a lot of it. Now, that sounds like, well, gosh, the Earth cools down a little bit and suddenly there's life. It didn't take very long before this planet could boast of life, which suggests, doesn't prove anything, but it does suggest that life wasn't all that hard to get started. And if it got started here, why wouldn't it get started in other places?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Out of all the planets that we know of now, which one excites you the most as far as research and stuff?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't study the worlds of the solar system, so
Okay.
I don't have a hound in this fight. But there, in terms of looking for ET, there's a system called TRAPPIST-1, TRAPPIST, like the beer, and it was called that because it was found by the Belgian astronomy community, and they have a lot of TRAPPIST beer there. Anyhow, but it's not just one planet; it's 7 planets in one
Wow.
system, and they're all about the same size as Earth. And some of them are at the right distance from the star, which they're orbiting, to be at a comfortable temperature. So that to me is interesting because you can imagine that if life got started on any of those planets, it would spread to the others,
Hmm.
right? It just rocks get kicked off and they'll by chance land on somebody else's planet. And if that planet is even remotely habitable, bacteria and stuff like that will survive. And so it could be that you'll have a whole system, a whole zoo of biology there, not just one planet with life on it, but maybe up to something like a half dozen planets with life on it. And I think that's an interestingly different idea than what we normally think of when we think of worlds with life.
That is interesting. And how do you just? I mean, you just talked about this place that's far away. Is it because you have those radio telescopes to check it out, or how are you guys finding them?
Well, those planets were found by people using what are called optical telescopes, like
Okay,
like your 12-inch.
sure.
Was it a Meade or
Yeah, I
Celestine?
mean,
Meade.
Starfinder. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, 12-inch. So that's a big telescope, but they were found that way, not because the telescope actually allowed you to see them. They're
Right.
still too dim compared to the star that they're orbiting to be seen directly. But you can, see the motions of the star
Hmm.
that's, moving around a little bit because of the gravitational pull of these orbiting planets. You have to disentangle all 6 or 7 of them, but that's possible to do.
Well, like with the smaller telescope, and I don't think people realize this because they'll pick up the binoculars and look through them, and they're disappointed. But what people don't realize is when you're looking at planets and you're looking at stars, that there is a difference because the planet will appear round.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, no, that was a big thing back in 1610 when Galileo first pointed a really cruddy telescope in the direction of Jupiter's, Mars, Venus, these places, and found that they were little worlds. Well, they're not so little when you get up close, but
Hmm.
that these were worlds and not indeed like the stars, which just look like points of light, no matter how
Right.
big your telescope is.
Right. When you were a kid, did you have telescopes?
I built one when I was 10, I think, and I was
Wow.
trying to make time lapse movies of Jupiter's moons, I remember. But this was back in the day when it was, you had to do it on film, and I was never successful with it.
Right. 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 This is just really fascinating because I've been in astronomy since I can remember. With telescopes, I'm on my third or fourth telescope right now.
Okay, well, it sounds it. I mean,
I
as you
love it.
say, you have a big one. What do you tend to look at?
I'll just look at the planets. I love Jupiter because with the scope I have, Jupiter's like a 50 cent piece, so you can see some detail with that. Mars is fun because you can actually see the polar spot on there, the polar cap and stuff like that. But I also enjoy because you can see the Andromeda galaxy really clear from here.
Yeah.
Because I live, there's a lot of light pollution where I live, so the stuff that I'm going to pick up is going to be, the brightest stuff in the sky. So like, that Andromeda thing's really impressive to see.
I think actually being an amateur astronomer these days is probably more exciting than it's ever been because with these electronic cameras that you can put on the scope and so forth, you can make images. I mean, there was some amateur that I visited. He was a doctor, medical doctor, and he was somewhere near, well, where is it? Merced, maybe. No, it wasn't Merced. It was closer to Sacramento. Anyhow, it's the Central Valley. So he was in a place where it wasn't all that dark. but he had this huge setup, all automated. He could use his telescope even when he was traveling halfway around the world. He did it via the internet. He just turned on his telescope, make sure it wasn't raining,
Nice.
and he made these photos of galaxies and so forth. They were better than the ones I worked with when I was doing my thesis. So it's a good time to be an amateur astronomer, I think.
It is, but you know what's funny is when I go up to the mountains, I'm totally lost. Because
Really?
coming from here, because you're only going to get the brightest stars, like Orion's belt and all that. You can see all that here, but when you get up the hill, I mean, it's like one big blanket of it. I kind of equate it to being in one of those globe things that you shake the snow with, because that's what it looks like, a snow globe. When you're looking up, it's just so full of stars.
Stars everywhere. Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe you should move to the moon.
That's what I should do. Think how clear that would be in the view of the Earth, huh?
It'd be real clear until you died of lack of oxygen. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I got to give the astronauts credit, because to me, if going and flying the moon would be cool, but being out on the moon and physically looking at Earth and thinking, man, if something goes wrong,
yeah. Yeah.
there's no way back.
You're not getting home. Yeah.
You're not getting home no matter what.
Like the Martian.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was a great movie. Loved it. But what's a day like for you? Working with SETI.
Well, I mean, my daily life is probably not different from most other people's, because there's always something you have to do in terms of, keeping the organization running. As I say, I do a lot of writing. I do some speaking, that kind of thing. And, we say writing. Well, we're writing. Well, some of it is, books and so forth. That maybe doesn't help the Institute too much. I don't know. But, the website always requires new articles and stuff like that. And the other thing is money. I mean, SETI is, it's not funded by the government. It hasn't been since 1993. Mm-hmm. So you have to raise money somehow. And, find people out there who find it interesting to look for ET with, a good experiment, and are willing to contribute to that financially. So, all those things take up a lot of time. You're always, worrying about if you will, the daily requirements of the job. And only occasionally do you get to sort of sit back and think, well, how can we make this experiment more likely to succeed? Right. So there's all that.
Interesting. And you have written a lot of papers and stuff.
I have. Yeah, I have. I've written a lot of articles and so forth. And media, of course. But in fact, recently, of course, the media of all, I guess since June, when the government put out its report about the Navy videos, mm-hmm. I've, had a lot of inquiries about that.
Earlier, you were saying how when people send you photos or video, you can, analyze them and kind of figure out what it is. Is it because these things take certain flight paths?
No, it's not that. It's that, knowing how cameras work is really the biggest thing. Because, for example, most people these days are making photos not with a camera, but with their phones, mm-hmm. right? And so the phone cameras, I mean, they make good pictures, but they've had to automate everything in order to do that, because they figured that the person using the phone doesn't know what an f-stop is or, any of that. So the phones are completely automatic in terms of exposure, but also in terms of the focus, right? You know that because, you're shooting something with your iPhone or whatever, and it keeps shifting focus depending mm-hmm. on what it thinks you're trying to point at, right? So when people see something in the sky at night, some bright light going over, and they think, I don't know what that is. Doesn't look like a satellite. It doesn't look like an airplane, whatever. So, they make a video of it, and the poor camera, it's dark, and there's this one bright thing in the field of view. So it doesn't quite know what to focus on. So it focuses on that one dot for a while, but then it'll unfocus because it's still confused. And when it unfocuses, what you see is actually the diffraction pattern of the optics in the phone. And it looks to many people, they say, wow, look at all that detail on that UFO. But of course, mm-hmm. that's not what it is at all. That kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, because the chip inside the phone is trying to focus on whatever's moving.
Yeah, that's right. It's so automatic that you really don't know what's going on unless you know a little bit about photography.
Have you come across anything that you can't explain?
Well, there are lots of things I can't explain. Doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
they're aliens.
Right.
Uh, but, almost all of those, maybe all of them, are reports that I get. People call me up and they say, look, back in 1983, I was sitting on the back porch and suddenly there was this thing that moved across the sky and then, it blew up and it was a trail of whatever. I can't explain that. I can think of maybe some things it could be, but I can't explain it because I wasn't there. And, all I'm hearing is somebody's story about it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not enough. I mean, it's like trying to solve a murder because somebody said, well, I saw this guy, being shot and so forth. But okay, fine. That's a start, but it doesn't allow you to solve the mystery of who did it.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about eclipses a little bit. Why is there so much time in between, like solar and lunar eclipses?
Well, yeah, lunar. I mean, there isn't. I mean, they're each. They happen about every 1.5 years or something like that. And you would say, well, okay, the solar eclipses, which are of course the most interesting ones.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're having an eclipse this week, but that's a
Yes.
lunar eclipse. The advantage of the lunar eclipse is you don't have to go anywhere. You can just walk outside and see it. You don't have to travel 500 miles to some location as you usually have to do with a solar eclipse. But on the other hand, the solar eclipses are a lot more interesting. And the reason you say, okay, what's happening in a solar eclipse? Well, the moon's getting between us and the sun, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the moon blocks the sun and whatever. And you would think, well, the moon goes around every 28, 29 days. Why don't we have a solar eclipse every 28 or 29 days? And the reason is because of the tilt of the orbital axis of the moon's orbit. It's not
Mm-hmm.
in the ecliptic. It's not in the Earth's orbit around the sun. It's not coincident in terms of its angle. And because of that 5-degree difference, it becomes a complicated geometry problem, but it was solved a long time ago. And it just means that solar eclipses are hard to predict if you're just, Joe Sixpack. But the people who have done it, it's all been programmed in computers now, and they can predict them very, very accurately. And let them do it, I say.
Absolutely. Oh, I had a question too about. I know it's been going around Facebook, and I think it happened last year. A certain date, I think it was December, where they claimed the Star of Bethlehem can be seen, or a quasar, or whatever that is, can be seen.
Well, are you referring to attempts to explain the Star of Bethlehem?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there have been a lot of papers written on that, mostly in the popular journals, and the one that I read most recently thought maybe it was a conjunction of the naked eye planets. So you get Jupiter and Venus and maybe Saturn, all in the same part of the sky, very close to one another. And that, it happens occasionally. And people think, oh, that's so unusual. And maybe that was what they called the Star of Bethlehem. I mean, nobody knows. We don't have any photos. We just have sort of vague descriptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people looked at it because obviously the motion of the planets is very well known. So you can, take a program, the Sky at Night program or whatever software program, run it on your phone or your computer, and just back it up to, December 25th, year 2000, whatever, and look at the sky and see, is there anything unusual here? So people have done that sort of thing. I don't know that they've come up with a definitive answer. I don't know that anybody ever will.
True. What about black holes?
Well, I'm all in favor of black holes. They're they're interesting because they're the physics that goes on inside a black hole is completely unlike the kind of physics we normally deal with. Right? It's because of the incredible strength of gravity in these black holes that it starts to break down space-time. And so odd things happen. If you fall into a black hole, not only is it bad for your health, but what happens to you is very bizarre. And I think that that's the appeal of black holes. The fact that when you get deep into a black hole, you're in a region of space where the gravity is so strong that space gets bent. And that's a circumstance you don't experience normally on your way to the mall. Right. So when space gets bent, that's a real laboratory for the kind of physics that is most interesting for theoreticians to investigate. They want to know, you know, the ultimate structure of the universe, and the best laboratory is often a black hole. I mean, that's what Stephen Hawking worked on for a long time.
Mm-hmm. What if there actually are ETs out there traveling around? What type of craft would it take to be able to do this? Because obviously, like you say, these black holes, could probably cause, from what you're saying, the black holes could probably cause issues if you don't have the right type of craft. So, what do you see as the type of craft that they would have to be moving around in?
Well, I mean, I don't want to speak for the aliens here, but
sure.
I mean, to begin with, are they going to be able to travel from one star to another? Right. I mean, that's one of the questions that comes up if you're one of the 100 million Americans who believe that, aliens are visiting Earth. You got to say, well, okay, they've come light years of distance. They've come a fair piece. If they've got rockets that are as fast as ours, it takes them 100,000 years to get here, at least. Right. So that's too long. So you have to assume that they're using different kind of craft. Yes. And, the most speediest craft that we can imagine, it just takes more energy, are matter antimatter drives, where you collect some matter and antimatter and you let them annihilate and shoot it all out the back of the rocket, whatever. Then you get a lot of bang for your buck. And that's the way they supposedly worked in Star Trek.
Right.
All of this mediated by dilithium crystals, whatever the heck those are. But they would just call up Scotty and say, hit the accelerator. But they never really explain how it worked because, it wouldn't work that way. But, I don't know what the alien, I mean, it's like asking Thomas Jefferson, how do you think airplanes will work? And he said, well,
right.
I don't know. Maybe big rubber bands. I don't know. It
just boggles the mind because, like you said, that they're so far away, yet people claim they're seeing these things. So it'd be interesting to find out what type of propulsion system they're using. Because I mean, like in all these movies and stuff where you see, like these aliens are like picking up like our old shows, for instance, like within the solar system, like you see the ones where they're watching I Love Lucy and stuff still because they think that's what we're about because it's taken it that long to get there.
Yeah, well, that's right. I Love Lucy, I think, first aired in 1953.
Yeah.
So, that's almost 70 years ago. So, if they're 70 light years away, they're in for a real treat this season if they watch Earth TV. There's this new show called I Love Lucy.
There you go. Just premiered. Lucy and Desi. What do you say to people that want to get into what you're doing, or if you go to a lecture and you're trying to like get kids and stuff enthusiastic into what you do? Well, what do you say to them?
Well, you don't have to say much to kids. They're already interested in aliens, right? It's like getting kids interested in dinosaurs. You don't have to go to a whole lot of trouble. So, that's not the issue. It's, it's useful to maybe address some of the questions they already have, which is, what about flying saucers? Did the aliens really visit Roswell, New Mexico? I think like that. They ask questions. And kids are great audiences because, to begin with, from their point of view, anything's possible. And secondly, they're very honest. If they think you're being boring, they just go to sleep on their desks. So I recommend for everyone to, if you're a public speaker, talk to kids, first, or maybe not first, but, but you don't have to get them interested in aliens. You have to answer their questions because that's what they're really interested in. I mean,
sure.
It's not like adults. Adults ask questions. It's mostly men because they're trying to impress the other men in the audience. They don't really, I don't have the feeling that they really care about the answer, but kids do care about the answer.
How powerful is the sound waves that are leaving those SETI units?
Sound waves?
Yeah, or the sound that they're projecting out. How powerful is that?
Oh, well, we don't talk to anybody, and of course it's radio, not sound. Because
oh, sorry, radio. I was trying to get the right word.
Space is not very good for sound. No, we don't broadcast. We leave that to NBC.
Yeah. Okay. But how powerful? I mean, for those things to be receiving, radio, broadcasting from the satellites and stuff. How powerful do those things have to be?
Well, it depends on how good the receiving setup is that the aliens have, right? I mean, some people think, oh, well, you can broadcast a signal to them, but it'll never really get there because the signal will just fade to nothingness between here and there.
Right.
No, it's true. It gets weaker. Of course, it gets weaker. It's like you have a flashlight or a laser pointer. You can point it at the moon, but you won't see a big red spot on the moon because the energy density, the flux of the thing gets weaker with distance. Okay, but it isn't that if you were standing on the moon, you couldn't see that laser pointer if you had a big enough telescope. So the question for the aliens is if they really want to watch I Love Lucy, they just have to have the mother of all antennas. But then again, I mean, we've had radio for 100 years and we have some pretty big antennas. So if they've had radio for 1,000,000 years, maybe it's a high school science fair project for them to build a setup that could pick up our TV. What's really questionable is would they want to watch it? But
Right. And another question I have too is if you get a transmission in, do all of you guys? I mean, I don't know how many astronomers are at your facility, but I mean, does everybody sit down and discuss the possibilities of what it could be, or how's that work?
well, I mean, there have only been a couple of instances where we picked up a signal that looked convincing enough that anybody even got a phone call about it. But that did happen once, and it's true. I mean, everybody was interested, of course. So everybody was looking at the computers and looking at the numbers that were parading across the screen. And of course, they're discussing. Well, what do you think it is? I mean, how are we going to verify that this is really ET? And I mean, people have thought about that beforehand, but you have to really do it. And then somebody, actually, that particular instance in 1997 was worked out when one of the people at the Institute looked up the frequencies for all the satellites, that were up in the right position when we got this signal and found a good match with one of those satellites. And then, it was such a good match that it couldn't have been coincidence. And so at that point, we knew what we had found, and it wasn't ET. It was, some European satellite, in fact.
It just interests me that you guys have the knowledge to do that.
Well, I mean,
To be able to tell it is.
oh yeah, well, I mean, I don't know that with knowledge, but it was incentive, and this guy did the right thing. He looked through the tables of frequencies for satellites. It's like identifying Bigfoot. How do you do it?
Yeah, identify Bigfoot. Well, like I said earlier, I just wonder, if they're like, when you think like we'll talk like we were talking about Star Trek earlier, like when they contacted V'ger, God forbid, and yet when they were trying to communicate with it, it was on an old frequency that they had to come up with, and I just wonder if SETI's going to run into anything like that, trying to hear these sounds, if it's some frequency that maybe you guys don't cover or something that they're trying to talk to us, but you guys can't listen.
It's not impossible. But if somebody were trying to find Homo sapiens here on planet Earth and pointed their antennas here, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, there's just a wide range of frequencies because we use them all, right? In fact, that's why we have the FCC, because they have to assign, and international organizations as well. They have to sort of parcel out these frequencies because, it's like water, right? You have to sort of apportion where it all goes because you have a finite resource. And that's true of the radio spectrum too. So you could listen at almost any frequency and hear something. It might be shortwave radio. It might be I Love Lucy. It might be reality television. It might be AM radio. There's something at essentially every frequency. Radar. Right. We use these as much of the spectrum as we can. So I don't worry too much that we're listening at the wrong frequency.
Well, it makes you think too, because if people are actually seeing, these craft and they're being abducted or whatever, obviously they've been here enough times to know what frequencies that we have.
Are you talking about, the UFOs?
Yeah. I'm just saying, these people that claim to be abducted and all this, obviously they've been back and forth enough to know what frequencies we have here on Earth.
Well, yeah, but I mean, maybe what you're saying there is that if we really are being visited, that they would broadcast something for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe they would, or maybe they're just radio silent, and maybe they're just shy. I mean, I don't know. But I do think that if they were really here, it wouldn't just be the subject of discussion on the radio late at night. I mean, it would be pretty obvious to everybody
Right.
if we were really being visited. But to begin with, you couldn't catch that next Southwest flight to Los Angeles because the FAA would say, look, there's some unidentified craft in our airspace and it's too dangerous for commercial flights to take off. But they don't say that.
How did you feel about the like earlier you mentioned it, that recent release by the government about what the Navy saw? How do you feel about that?
Well, if you go online, it's pretty trivial to find explanations for all of those videos that have nothing to do with aliens, right? You're looking at other aircraft or you're looking at whatever. So what surprised me about that report is it said in 144 cases, we could not figure out what was going on. And that included, my understanding was, it included those 3 videos that were, on everybody's computer beginning in 2017. So they could explain them, but somehow the intelligence departments, the intelligence agencies that wrote that report, that 8-page report, they could not explain it, which made me think, gosh, this just shows that they ought to outsource all these investigations to the web because there's plenty of people out there who could figure out what they were. But, the report didn't even mention the possibility that these videos had anything to do with extraterrestrials. That wasn't an admitted possibility. So the upshot of that is that the people who still think we're being visited are convinced, presumably more than ever, that the government's just covering up. And that's a very convenient explanation because you can never disprove it. You can say whatever you want, but if they say it's all being covered up, then, well, yeah, I guess that could be, but it doesn't help you any, but it's a good way to explain things.
And one thing I can honestly say is that when I hear SETI Institute, you guys are the first thing I think about with extraterrestrials and stuff. That's the first thing I think about. Oh, it's SETI.
Well, I'm glad. We've actually been to, sometimes SETI is mentioned in the movies, and I think that probably helps. And of course, Contact, it was kind of what we do. But then Contact was a book written by Carl Sagan, and he knew something about SETI.
So for everybody that came in late a little bit, can you tell everybody what SETI does exactly?
Yeah, well, SETI runs these experiments to try and find life elsewhere. Now, these days, the majority of the scientists at the SETI Institute are looking for life on Mars, Europa, Enceladus, Ganymede, Callisto, nearby worlds where there might be life, because we can get to those worlds with our rockets. But if you're looking for intelligence, I think it's safe to say that humans are the most intelligent things in our solar system. You may not believe it when you consider your neighbors, but it is clearly the case, right? There may be life elsewhere in the solar system, but if so, it's going to be very simple life, right? Because it's, from all sorts of considerations. But that doesn't mean that the trillion other planets in the galaxy are all devoid of intelligence, right? So we think that it might be out there. And the way we try and find it is obviously not by going there. We can't do that, but we can point antennas in their direction, or various light sensing devices to look for flashing lasers. Maybe they have big lasers that they're using to propel their spacecraft around. We might see that. Or the radio experiments, which are the bulk of them so far, is just trying to pick up something on the radio. And, hey, this is a signal that's made by a transmitter somewhere.
What type of noise do planets make?
Well, planets are not great radio emitters unless they have a strong magnetic field. And so the Earth makes a lot of, radio noise. And you can hear, it just sounds like static. A lot of it just sounds like what's called white noise. So if you turn on your kitchen faucet, what you hear is white noise. Not terribly interesting. You probably don't spend a lot of time listening to your kitchen faucet. Or if you do, you should probably get some sort of professional help.
Yes.
But the sun makes a lot of radio static because it's got all this hot gas and magnetic fields. And, if you listen to it, it's static, but it's static. They sort of, it moves around a little bit, but it's not terribly interesting. The only interesting things to listen to in terms of their radio emission in nature are the pulsars, because the pulsars are, they're these rotating dead stars. And the first ones sort of pulsed every second. So you hear, like a clock, right? But they're pulsars that, they click 1,000 times a second or more. And then it just sounds like a tone, beep, right? So if you go again online, you can find audio recordings of pulsars, and they're quite interesting, actually. I've had contact with some musicians who want to, score something against these pulsars.
That's interesting. What about black holes? What noise do they make?
Well, the black holes themselves don't make any noise because nothing can get out of a black hole.
Okay.
But when they're eating something, and they're often eating something, nearby stars or whatever, they swirl in, you get all this hot gas, and that makes noise too. But again, it sounds like your kitchen faucet.
Okay. Is it true, and I had heard years ago, like I said, I had old encyclopedias growing up, that, there's usually stars are lined up in like threes where you'll have the bright one and then there's stuff behind it.
You got to say that again. I'm not quite understanding.
Well, like you'll have a star that's like in the front, and then there's stars behind it, like right directly behind it.
Well, I mean, you could have that situation.
Okay.
Right? I mean, you could. It's like, I don't know, standing at the bottom of the stands at a football game. You see all these people, and in some cases they line up. That happens with stars too. And what's interesting about that, I mean, in general, you'd say that's not very interesting, but it might be interesting because stars are massive enough to bend light. And so they can bend the light from the star behind them. Galaxies do that too, actually. And then you get some strange effects. And in fact, you can use a star as a telescope because of this. Mm-hmm. Right? We could use the sun as a very, very powerful telescope. The only thing is you have to get out to the place, the nearest place where you can use the sun as a telescope because of the focus is, what is it? It's like 55 billion miles out. Now, to give you scale, Pluto is typically like 3 billion, whatever it is.
Sure.
So this is a lot farther than Pluto. It's not impossible to build a rocket to go out there and use the sun as a telescope, but, you can only look in one direction because the line between you and the sun is only in one direction.
Sure. Oh, the other question I had too is what about different colored stars? Like, like Taurus, the bull kind of has a yellowish look to it. What causes the different colors?
Well, the Taurus is a constellation, so of course it's made of many stars. Okay. But the thing that determines the color of a star is very simple. It's how big it is, because the bigger it is, the hotter it is, and the hotter it is, the bluer it is. Now, there's some interesting exceptions here, but that's generally the case. So the dimmest stars, which are, small ones, they tend to be sort of dull red, right? Mm-hmm. You heat them up a little bit and they get kind of yellow, like the sun. And when you get to the hotter ones, they're definitely blue. So when you look out, most people look at the stars and don't see the colors, but you probably do because you've used a telescope long enough. Yeah. And a telescope helps too because you get more light. But if you're looking at seeing different colors, you're just seeing different temperatures of stars. Usually that's what it is.
That's interesting. I'm learning so much today.
Yeah. Well, that was all worked out about 100 years ago. Actually, there was a thesis done by a woman by the name of Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, and she worked out exactly, what you could learn by looking at stars of different temperature, how you could figure out what they're made of. Mm-hmm. And that was interesting because 100 years earlier, a very famous astronomer said, well, we're never going to know what the composition of the stars is. And she showed, how you could do that. That was I think it was named the best astronomy PhD thesis ever written. And most people don't know her name. That was because, of course, she did it at a time when women in astronomy were, not part of the scene.
Gotcha. And how close is the nearest star?
Well, Proxima Centauri is the name, and it's about 4.4 light years away, 4.3, 4.2, something in there. So.
Well, that's not too far. But I mean, if you're traveling, obviously you're going to lose 4 years or whatever.
No, it's not too bad. I had that kind of mileage on my Honda. But if you actually were to go to it, using NASA's fastest rocket, the travel time's about 75,000 years. So it probably pays to get an aisle seat.
Or be put to sleep on there like they did with Alien, people start waking up and stuff.
Yeah, people talk about suspended animation.
Yeah.
The only trouble is we don't know how to do it. Other than that, it's good.
So what advice do you have for people who are just at home and they just want to go outside and take a look-see at the stars and stuff? How can they do that? I guess it depends where they live, too. I mean, if they live up in the mountains, they're going to get a really good view. But if they're living in the city, I mean, are binoculars okay to use and all that?
Yeah, I would certainly start with binoculars. Binoculars are okay to use. With binoculars, you can see the 4 largest moons of Jupiter with no problem whatsoever. You can almost see the rings of Saturn. You need a little bit more magnification usually. Even Galileo, who was a pretty good observer, he realized there was something wrong with Saturn's shape, but he didn't recognize that they were rings. But the moons of Jupiter, which are, after all, the discovery that Galileo made with a telescope that had a 1-inch diameter lens. 1 inch. I mean,
you imagine?
It was really a toy, but he was persistent. He was good at it. And so he finds these moons of Jupiter, and suddenly the Earth isn't the center of the universe anymore because, doggone it, how important can Earth be? We've only got 1 moon, and this other thing has 4. And it turned out it didn't have 4; it had like 70. So,
wow.
Well,
with the 1-inch telescope, he had good eyes too, man. I'll tell you.
I think he probably did. And the other advantage he had was that there wasn't too much in the way of illumination at night from street lights and stuff like that. That helps a bit.
Right. Sir, thank you for coming on tonight. I have learned so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time out. Oh my gosh, it was fun to pick your brain.
Okay, well, it was fun to be with you.
I would like to get you on in the future if that's okay.
Just send me an email.
Sounds good. All right, thank you so much, and have a great evening. I have learned so much. Thank you. Oh my.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening. All right, guys, that was great, man. I learned so much. I've been into that stuff since I was a kid, and I've had three or four telescopes. My biggest is 12-inch, and I loved it. I have a camera on the 12-inch, and I've got it rigged so that I can look at the stuff on my computer screen and all that, and it's just something I love to do. So I was glad to get Seth on. Tomorrow night, Gino Munari is going to be on, and he worked at the Dunes in Las Vegas, and he's got quite the history to talk about. Where the Dunes, had two different owners, and each owner had a different style of managing, and one of the owners kind of had mob connections, and he knows a lot about the mobsters that were in Vegas, during the 60s and early 70s. So we're going to talk with Gino Munari tomorrow. If you liked the show, share it with 5 people. If you didn't like the show, share it with the 5 people anyway. We're all equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio, and we're trying to get the word out. Our YouTube audience is building up. Fantastic. Keep coming to YouTube. Keep clicking on subscribe, because we're going to keep bringing these shows to you guys. As you can see, I've got a ticker running along the bottom about keeping the shows on, and we're like PBS. We are nonprofit, and it all comes out of my pocket. So I'm looking for a little bit of help here, and this is my PBS moment. And if you guys could find it in your heart to donate to help keep us on the air and keep these guests coming, PayPal.me at California Haunts. It all goes back into expenses for radio equipment, internet, the service, mics, all that good stuff, and stuff for my team, equipment for my team, so we can go out and help people with ghost hunting and whatnot. So that would be great. Also, YouTube. We have 104 subscribers now. We want to build that up. So if you guys can, it's kind of hard to head to YouTube because there's no URL. We're trying to get to the point where we get a dedicated URL. I was told 100 subscribers, and now they've upped it. So I'm waiting on a letter from them to see what I actually have to put a dedicated URL out there. Because if you try to Google us or whatever, you're not going to find us. It's just not. So you need to go to our website for that. Go to www.californiahauntsradio.com and go to our website and click on the video on the front page, and that'll take you over to YouTube, and you can subscribe from there. The more subscribers we have, the more popular the show is going to get, and we're building up. In fact, we're starting up. We're going to be airing on iHeartRadio starting tomorrow. So I'm real excited about that, and I'm waiting from TuneIn also to get the okay from them for this show. So I'm getting really, everything's happening. Everything's happening. But I want to thank you guys for coming. And remember, if you guys want to go see what Seth does, head over to SETI's website. Just type in SETI, SETI. It'll take you right to the website. But I thank you guys for coming, and I will see you guys. I will see you tomorrow at the same time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And let me cue up my little thingies here. And thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.